This is the commentary on the 12th and final book of the Aeneid, The Fortunes of War. Turnus is the first word in this book, and it's his name that's going to appear in the last couple of lines. And so some have looked at this as Turnus's book, since his name starts it and more or less finishes it. And there's going to be a lot of focus on Turnus and what Turnus is doing, although Aeneas will, of course, play a prominent role too. In line 6, as in the African hinterland, a lion, hit in the chest by hunters badly hurt, gives battle, then at last, and revels in it. Tossing his bunch of mane back from his nape, all fighting heart, he snaps the shaft the tracker put into him, and roars with bloody maw. So Turnus, in the extremity, flared up and stormed at the old king. So we get a lion simile in here, which more or less prefigures the rest of the book, this lion of Turnus who is upset about things. He speaks to Latinus. Latinus answers steadily back to him in this one. It is not right that I should pledge my daughter to a suitor of other days. Gods and prophecies of men forbade. I broke my bonds of duty, stole the girl though promised from her husband, and took arms against the will of heaven, which is the war there. He basically tells Turnus that he may give up at this point and that he should give up. And Turnus, in his response, "My lord, I beg you, put this reckoning for my sake aside. Let me bid my death for honor." And then at line 74 there, we end up getting a reference back to the Iliad Book 5. His mother goddess, that is Venus, she who, when he runs, hides him in a womanish cloud, who hides herself in empty phantoms. In Book 11 of the Iliad, Venus comes down and whisks Aeneas away when he is in danger. Queen Amata jumps into it. She always speaks in a tone stronger than we think. And she'll die, if he doesn't end up holding up his part of valor, of honor, of battle here. Refrain from single combat with the Trojans. Any mischance that may await you there awaits me too. For with you I'll forsake this hostile daylight. Never as a captive shall I look on Aeneas as my son. Basically announcing that she will commit suicide if Turnus doesn't end up winning because she won't take Aeneas in. Now, here at 92, we get Lavinia. Lavinia, listening to her mother, streamed with tears on burning cheeks. A deepening blush brought out a fiery glow on her hot face, as when one puts a stain of crimson dye on ivory of India, or when white lilies blush infused with crimson roses. So rich the contrast in her coloring seemed. Desire stung the young man as he gazed, rapt at the girl. He burned yet more for battle, and answered Amata. So she blushes when Turnus is going to fight for her. And Lavinia actually never speaks in the whole of the Iliad. Not a single word is recorded about her. The simile that describes her is a simile of makeup, of cosmetics, of preparing herself with beauty. If she spoke, this might become a war for love rather than one for destiny. So we have a non-speaking Lavinia probably is to keep the focus on destiny and not on whether or not they love this woman. Turnus responds in around 113, with our own blood let us too put an end to war, and there on that field let Lavinia be the prize. And so there's going to be a one-on-one combat in this case. We get a description of Turnus's horses. Turnus's Aristeia begins about line 124 as he prepares for war, with a long old description that goes all the way down to the bull simile in line 144. Flashed from his eyes as a wild bull at bay, will give a fearsome bellow and whet his horns to fury on a tree trunk, striking blows against the wind, kicking up spurts of sand in prelude to a fight. Likewise, meanwhile, Aeneas, fierce in his maternal armor, whetted his edge for war and roused himself to anger, full of joy that by the terms he offered war should cease. So there's no real emphasis on Aeneas's armor, which we've had described earlier. Aeneas is set for peace. He comforted his officers, allayed pale Ulysses' fear, recalling fate's design, then ordered men to take Latinus an assured reply and set conditions for the coming peace. The next day then begins, right? The next day, it picks up again here. Whoops, sorry. Should have had this one here. There's the religious preparations for it. Everyone comes out to see. Even the gods are viewing it here around line 182. 184, Juno surveyed the plains, the facing lines, Troy's and Laurentum's and Latinus's towns. And Juno riles up Juturna in this one. You know, I honor you above all Latin girls who ever entered great-hearted Jove's unwelcome bed. So, oh, favorite of mine, who has ever slept with or / been raped by my husband. She's being kind to Juturna in this one, but under unpleasant circumstances. Now I see a soldier meeting a destiny beyond his strength. His doomsday are now at hand. Juno says, there is no time for tears. Here about line 210. Be quick, go snatch your brother back from death if there is a way, or else renew the war, cast out the pact which they drew up. I'll be sponsor to your audacity. So she's trying to get Juturna to help out Turnus and break the treaty. Back down we go to where the mortals are. Latinus is there, his shining brow crowned with 12 golden rays. Turnus rode behind his snowy team. Then from his quarters Lord Aeneas came, the father of the Roman race, aglow with starry shield and armor forged by heaven. Close at his side, the second hope of Rome, Ascanius. So you have the heroes coming out then. Aeneas the God-fearing then speaks his vows to Almighty Father, Saturnia, who is Juno, Mars, springs and streams, high heaven, the deep blue sea. At line 252, if on the other hand the day is ours, conferred by divine victory as I think, and may the gods confirm it by their will, I shall not make Italians underlings to Trojans. That is, there will be equality between the Trojans and the Italians. For myself I ask no kingdom. Let both nations, both unconquered, both subject to equal laws, commit themselves to an eternal union. I shall give rituals and gods to both. My father-in-law Latinus, let him keep his arms and keep his royal authority. My share will be a town with walls laid out and built by Trojans. Lavinia will give that town her name. So we know that Lavinium will then become, the place. In these terms he declared himself, and Latinus vows back. He vows on behalf of Turnus. Never shall that day dawn that sees our peace, our treaty ruptured by my countrymen, however things fall out. And then at the end, we get the ritual slaughter of the animals. Now, just after line 300, we get a very bad image of Turnus. This disquiet multiplied now as Turnus walked in silence, reverently and humbly to the altars, eyes downcast, his cheeks drawn, his flesh pale. Now Juturna excites the men. She moved into the ranks, disguised as camers, and there is rumor that she sends out there. She points out that we outnumber the Trojans 2-1, so we should probably end up winning. And Juturna then sends a false sign. At line 339 here. Winging down through rosy dawn-lit air, Jove's golden bird came chasing offshore seafowl, noisy flocks, and with a swoop upon the waves caught up in crooked talons a surpassing swan. The Italians gazed enthralled. Then all the birds in flight wheeled round with screams wondrous to see, their wings darkening heaven, and in a cloud harried the enemy through the air until their pressure and the swan's weight broke his grip. His talons dropped the prey into the river, then gaining depth of cloud, he soared away. So we have an eagle then being losing his prey, losing the swan because other birds attack him. The augur then gives a misunderstood sign. I welcome it, I see the gods behind it. Arm with me, follow my lead. So at line 365, he finished, then ran forward with the spear to launch it at the facing enemy. The peace here is voided, the treaty is broken, and this is very similar to what happens at the end of Book 3 and the start of Book 4 of the Iliad, where the one-on-one combat between Menelaus and Paris, which is supposed to decide, what's to happen here at the end of the Trojan War, is voided by Trojans who have charged forward and attacked the Achaeans. So the Latins violate the peace first, and everything descends into the war. Let's see. His treaty void, there we go, about 393. His treaty void, avid to break the pact, Messapus rode against Alustes, even as the prone man begged for mercy, thrust hard downward with his beam-like shaft. At 411, out of one altar, Coroneus pulled a half-burnt firebrand facing Ebesus. Anytime they're using these fires from the altars of sacrifice, it's a violation. It's an impious religious violation that they shouldn't be doing. We have a couple of other people mentioned here. Aeneas at line 430 speaks, "The man of honor, Aeneas, stood bareheaded with his right hand out, unarmed. Where bound? Are you a mob? Why this outbreak of brawling all at once? Cool your hot heads. A pact has been agreed to, terms have been laid down. I am the one to fight them. Let me do so, never fear. With this right hand I'll carry out the treaty. Turnus is mine. Our sacrifice obliged it." So he tries to calm the madness, like Poseidon did in Book 1 of the Aeneid, but he fails, unlike Poseidon, who did succeed. And then Aeneas gets hit. A wing shaft, an arrow whizzed and struck the man, sped by who knows what hand. So we don't know who did it in this case, but he has been wounded. Here at 444, we now get the focus on Turnus, since Aeneas has been wounded and is kind of moving away from direct combat. When Turnus saw Aeneas in retreat, he then moves forward. We get Mars in the war simile around 455. There we go, Mars like the war simile. Turnus then kills a number of people, which we would expect from his Aristeia. We had his equipage a couple of verses ago, well, quite a few verses ago, but we had his description of armor and spear and getting everything together, so we expect him to. And kills a whole bunch of named people, just like Achilles did. At line 493, here's a good land, Trojan, the western land you thought to take in war. Lie there and measure it. See what is gained by daring to face up to me in arms. See how far you go in founding cities. So mocking the Trojans for coming here for an area. There's a guy who's trampled by a chariot around the 520s. At 525, we shift back to Aeneas in his camp. There, he's got a couple of people helping Aeneas get into camp, and then at line 535, the Trojan healer, Eopix, comes up. To postpone the death of a father desperately ill, preferred to learn the power of herbs, a healer's way, and practice without glory silent arts. So he is a trained healer, trained by Apollo in this one. And it looks like the Trojans are going to lose here at about line 550. In the 560s, now shaken by the pain unmerited her son bore, Mother Venus picked a stalk of dittany from Cretan Ida, so she's going to interfere here. She brought this down, veiling her face in a dark cloud, and for a secret poultice dipped the leaves to imbue a shining bowl of Tiber water, sprinkling in ambrosia's health-giving juices, and the fragrant heal-all, panacea in Greek. Quite unaware of her, old Eopix used the medicated fluid to lave the wound, to wash it out, and realizes that he didn't cure him. This is something else. No mortal agency brought this about. No art, however skilled, not my own hand preserves you, but a greater power, Aeneas. A god is here at work. He sends you back to greater actions. Where Eopix should have said, she, Venus, sends you back to greater work. So Aeneas is going to go back into battle. Speaking to Ascanius, he says, "Learn fortitude and toil from me, my son. Good fortune, learn from others. That is, work hard. Aeneas has lost almost everything. He has not been lucky in this one. Let your father, Aeneas, and uncle Hector stir your heart." From this point on, Aeneas is much more warlike, like Turnus. He attempted for a peace, but the peace didn't end up working out because the Latins, the Italians, ended up breaking it. So Juturna trembles and turns back, and we get a long storm simile. And Aeneas around the 630s is going after just Turnus. Juturna becomes a charioteer and keeps Turnus far away from this one. So again, he's being kept out of the danger here, and would not let him fight, but flew far onward at 653. Aeneas all the same kept after him, and tried to match on foot the speed and flight of the racing team Juturna whirled away. So chasing down, if at all possible, Turnus as he runs away. At this attack, a tide of battle fury swept the Trojan, overcome by Rutulian bad faith. He called on Jove and called on altars of the broken peace to witness. He raced, most terrible to see, with Mars behind him, rousing blind and savage slaughter. So Aeneas is a dangerous figure here. Around 685, Was it thy pleasure, Jupiter, that peoples, afterward to live in lasting peace, should rend each other in so black a storm? It's basically a prelude to the civil wars that are going to rack Rome at the end of the Republican period, and would be, for original listeners to this poem, have reminded them immediately of things like Caesar versus Pompey or Octavian versus Antony. Both Aeneas and Turnus are killing a number of people, down to line 707. There are the fire and rivers simile after that one. Aeneas throws a stone at 721. Turnus tries to do this sort of thing later on, and we get a series of apostrophes leading into about line 744. Each army's total strength was now engaged, all Latins and all Trojans, every man, and we get a list of people who are there. Aeneas's lovely mother sent the captain a new thought, to approach the walls, to bring his troops to bear upon the city quickly, and take the Latins by surprise, threatening sudden ruinous assault. So Venus has put it into Aeneas's head that he should probably go and attack the city of the Latins here, since they're out on the field attacking this one. Jupiter stands with us, he says at line 667. Down a bit. I shall destroy their town, root of this war, soul of Latinus's kingdom. I shall bring their smoking rooftops level with the ground. That is, he wants to destroy the town in much the same way as his own Troy had been destroyed. This town is heart and head of an unholy war. Make terms this time with a town in flames. Now in the 790s, we get him calling on the gods to witness that once more the fight was forced upon him, that Italians twice had turned his foes, that a second pact had now been broken. At line 800, we get the shepherd and bees simile. As when a shepherd, tracking bees, has found their hive in tufa, he fills up the cleft with acrid smoke. Inside, roused in alarm, the bees clamber about their waxen quarters, buzzing loud and growing hot with rage, as black and reeking puffs invade their home, and deep, in rocky dark, their hum resounds, while smoke goes up in the clear air. So the shepherd is Aeneas, bees are people, the beehive is a city like Carthage, which was earlier described as an orderly beehive. So this comparison of a city well managed to bees is being brought up again. But in this case, it attacks order, peace, and civilization. Aeneas the shepherd is attacking the city in this one, and so probably puts it in a more negative light. At line about 811, Queen Amata saw from her window now, and she thought that her prince had been destroyed in the melee, so she thinks that Turnus has been killed, which explains why Aeneas is here attacking the city directly. She rent her crimson gown and knotted round a beam that noose that strangled her in hideous death. So she dies not like Dido. Dido dies on a pyre with a sword, for the Romans, like a man would. She dies by hanging, which, as far as the Romans are concerned, is more like a woman should, or a woman would die. Princess Lavinia first tore her flower-like hair and scorched her cheeks, then all the rest crowded about her, mad with horror and grief. The palace rang with wailing. Everywhere in the town the black news ran, and hearts grew sick. So, just like the death of Dido inspires all the Carthaginians to grief, now Lavinia discovers what's going on like Anna discovered what was going on with Dido, and then grief goes throughout the city. Fighting his war meanwhile, this is Turnus towards the bottom of the page, and far away at the end of the battlefield, Turnus pursued a straggling few, and then notices that there aren't really enough people here. Now, Juturna encourages him in the 850s there to continue killing out here in the field, but he realizes it's his sister, 855. But Turnus answered, Sister, yes, I knew you, long since, when you spoiled the pact by guile and gave yourself to this war. Now again, you need not try to hide your divinity, but who has wished you sent down from Olympus to take this rough work on? 870, but now destruction of our homes. Can I face that? And at 875, heaven has grown cold. Shades of the underworld, be friendly to me. As a pure spirit, guiltless of that shame, I shall go down among you, never unfit to join my great forefathers. So Turnus is, in this one, more or less giving up. A messenger comes in the 880s for Turnus. Like a thunderbolt, Aeneas falls upon us, says the messenger there. The Latins turn their faces towards you. Latinus mutters in doubt. Worst of all, the queen who put such trust in you is gone, dead by her own hand. And so now Turnus knows that Amata has died by suicide. Just after 900 here, stunned and confused by one and another image of disaster, Turnus held stock still with a silent stare. In that one heart great shame boiled up, and madness mixed with grief, and love goaded by fury, courage inwardly known. So a very confused set of emotions and feelings there, and wildly he turned his burning eyes downward and from his car and gazed at the city. So he knows what's going on then. Ah, sister, line 915 here, see, fate overpowers us. No holding back now, we must follow where the gods call or implacable fortune calls. So fate again plays her hand. Let me be mad enough for this mad act. There's the boulder simile around 930. In line 940, Turnus takes responsibility for what's going on. Rutulians hold, put up your weapons, Latins. The outcome here, for good or ill, is mine. Better than single-handed in your stead, I pay for a broken truce and fight it out to a decision. So he offers to fight Aeneas one-on-one in this one. And Aeneas, immediately following, heard the name of Turnus and forsook the walls. He stops his sacking of the city. And Latinus, down at 959, even Latinus marveled, seeing two giant men of action, born in countries so far distant, come together, vowed to a decision by the sword. So it's going to be decided by hand-to-hand combat here at the end. So there's an open space of ground cleared. The combatants ran forward, hurtling spears at a distance first, then closing hand-to-hand, which is a very traditional way of beginning the fight with the spears. They fought with swords, though, and prowess merged with luck in the fighting power of each, and that fighting with swords is very much a Roman method of battle, not Homeric. And so we're probably looking at the Romans are working in the epic tradition, so spears need to be there, but the Romans are much more fighting with swords each other. We get the two bulls fighting simile. Just so Trojan Aeneas and the hero, son of Daunus, that is Turnus, battered shield on shield, fought with a din that filled the air of heaven. Jupiter held the two pans of a scale in balance and placed in each a destiny, doom for him whose weight would bring down death, or bring death down, which is like the scales that Jupiter balances in Book 22 of the Iliad between Achilles and Hector. At line 990, but then the treacherous blade, this is Turnus's blade, on impact broke and left the man undone, enraged, his one recourse in fight. So then we get an explanation as to why it was a weak sword. In 1105, Turnus ran because, he has to, and that would recall again Book 22 of the Iliad, where Hector ends up running, but for kind of a different reason, and Aeneas chases him then. We get the hound and the stag simile. As when a staghound corners a stag, blocked by a stream or by alarm at a barrier of crimson feathers, strung by beaters, then the dog assails him with darting, barking runs. The stag, in fear of nets and the high river bank, attempts to flee and flee again 1,000 ways. But packed with power, the Umbrian hound hangs on, muzzle agape. Now he has him, now, as though he had him, snaps eluded jaws and bites on empty air. Then he gives tongue in furious barking. River banks and pools echo the din, reverberant to the sky. Turnus in this one is then being compared to the stag, and you might recall that in Book 4 of the Aeneid, Dido is compared to the doe, and so we have these, male and female aspects of the deer that are these opponents or antagonists to Aeneas and what he needs to do. As Turnus ran, he raged at Rutulians, calling their names, demanding his own sword. Aeneas countered, threatening instant death for any who came near him. So he wants a sword, but Aeneas keeps the Latins away. 5 times they run a circular track, which is like the 3 times that Aeneas and Hector ran around Troy, also in Book 22. Then you get kind of this pause. Now on this field there happened to have stood an old wild olive, bitter-leaved, a tree sacred to Faunus. Turnus makes a prayer to Faunus, grew mad with fear. Have pity, I entreat you. Gracious earth, hold fast the steel if I have honored you all my life, whereas Aeneas's men warred on you and profaned you. And here at 10:54:55, the prayer is answered. Juturna interferes, ran up once again, changed to Metiscus, giving her brother back his sword. So he gets his weapon back, just like Achilles had received his weapon back from Athena in Book 22 when he was facing Hector. But Venus also comes forward and tore away Aeneas's weapon from the deep oak root, and both men were rearmed. So they both get a rearming then. Tall and savage, with spear to throw, and now both panting faced the duel of Mars. This omnipotent Olympus's king, meanwhile, this is the last glimpse in the epic that we have of what's happening up in heaven. And he has words for Juno, okay? By fate to be translated to the stars, that is, Aeneas has been decreed by fate to be deified after his death. So why, Juno, he asks, do you continue to plan against him? Come now, at last have done and heed our pleading, and give way. Do a couple of these minor things, but here at line 1093, 2, I forbid your going further. So Juno is no longer allowed to do anything. So spoke Jupiter. And with a downcast look, Juno replied, because I know that it is your will indeed, great Jupiter, I left the earth below, though sore at heart, and left the side of Turnus. So she will now step out of this and obeys her husband. I persuaded Juturna, I confess, to stir up trouble. This I swear by Styx's great fountainhead, inexorable, which high gods hold in awe. I yield now, and for all my hatred leave this battlefield. So she is going to give this one up. Rome will get to be founded eventually. The Roman people will eventually be there. And Juno, the great divine opponent of Aeneas throughout the book, is going to allow Aeneas then to, have his future. But one thing not retained by fate, I beg for Latium. So here, even at the end, agreeing to her husband, she plays for something, for the future greatness of your kin. When presently they crown peace with a happy wedding day, so let it be, and merge their laws and treaties, never command the land's-owned Latin folk to change their old name, to become new Trojans known as Teucrians. Never make them alter dialect or dress. Let Latium be. Let there be Alban kings for generations, and let Italian valor be the strength of Rome in after times. Once and for all Troy fell, and with her name let her lie fallen. That is, she doesn't want anything Trojan at all to survive. That these new people, these Trojans and Italians together, will be known as Italians or Latins, and Italian strength will be the strength of Rome, which is how Octavian ends up framing his opposition to Antony, that all of Italy went up against Antony in this last part of the Civil War. So the Italians will form the strength of Rome, and though the leadership will be Trojan, they won't even retain the name any longer. And he replied with a half smile, Sister of Jupiter, indeed you are, that is his own sister, and Saturn's other child, to feel such anger stormy in your breast. We are two peas of a pod. But come, no need, put down this fit of rage, I grant your wish. So the name of Trojans will disappear, and Alban kings will rule, and Latins will retain their dialect and their dress. The Trojans will not conquer and impose their civilization upon the Latins. The Latins, rather, will absorb the Trojans into them. Ausonian folk will keep their father's language and their way of life, and that being so, their name. The Teucrians will mingle and be submerged, incorporated. Rituals and observances of theirs I'll add, but make them Latin, one speech. The race to come, mixed with Ausonian blood, will outdo men and gods in its devotion. You shall see, and no nation on earth will honor and worship you so faithfully. So he agrees that the Trojans will be assimilated, which we might see as a very big concession on Jupiter's part, but we are ending things here. Aeneas will win, but his race will disappear in this one. To all this, Juno nodded in assent and was gladdened by the promise. She is finally happy, and she is gone. And that's the end of what we see with Juno. So Saturn then sets about a second plan to take Juturna from her warring brother, and she sends messengers of ill down to be an Oma to Juturna, and we get an arrow simile then. There's a fiend around 1171. In Turnus's face went screeching, flitting to and fro, and beating with her wings against his shield. Juturna, when she knew the wings, the shriek to be the fiend's, tore her hair, despairing. Then she fell upon her cheeks with nails, upon her breast with clenched hands. Turnus, how can your sister help you now? So she knows from the sign here that she has to leave, and she grieves what's going to happen to Turnus. In 1188, great-hearted Jupiter's high cruel commands, returns for my virginity, are they? He gave me life eternal, to what end? Why has mortality been taken from me? So she got nymph status in this one, probably because she'd been raped by Jupiter in the first place and got her immortal life then, and wishes over the course of the rest of that paragraph that she could die with her brother. In 1200, so she lamented, then with a long sigh covering up her head in her grey mantle, sank to the river's depths. So she is gone now too. That leaves Turnus by himself facing Aeneas. Aeneas moved against his enemy. Here is our final battle then. And shook his heavy pine tree spear. He called from his hot heart, because here in the big battle you have to have the two heroes call out to one another and say things. Rearmed now, why so slow? Why even now fall back? The contest here is not a race, but fighting to the death, with spear and sword. Take on all shapes there are, summon up all your nerve and skill. Choose any footing, fly among the stars, or hide in caverned earth. The other shook his head, that is Turnus, saying, I do not fear your taunting fury, arrogant prince. It is the gods I fear, and Jove my enemy. At 1221, even a dozen picked men, such as the earth produces in our day, could barely lift and shoulder it. That is, Turnus is going to try to throw a boulder, a big old heavy one, against Aeneas, which happens a couple of times in the Iliad, where a boulder is going to be thrown or is thrown and is described as being too heavy for anyone to be able to pick it up. But in the Iliad, it's most often Ajax the Greater trying to throw one, sometimes Diomedes, and it's usually described as so heavy that even 2 men couldn't move it. Here we've got 12, could barely lift it and shoulder it. And Turnus throws, but his knees gave way, line 1229. His blood ran cold and froze. The stone itself, tumbling through space, fell short and had no impact. So nothing comes of it. He misses. There is the dream simile. The fiend end up blocking and frustrating him and harasses him. He trembled now before the poised spear shaft and saw no way to escape. We get the siege attack simile in 1252. Never a stone that soared from a wall-battering catapult went humming loud as this, nor with so great a crack burst ever a bolt of lightning. This is the flight of the spear. It flew on like a black whirlwind, bringing devastation, pierced with a crash the rim of the sevenfold shield, cleared the cuirass's edge, and passed clean through the middle of Turnus's thigh. Now that's not a fatal blow, but it is one that's going to bring him down at this point. We then start to get the last pleas, the last little bits of what they're going to say to each other, here at line 1266. Turnus says, Clearly I earned this, and I ask no quarter. Make the most of your good fortune here. If you can feel a father's grief, and you too had such a father in Anchises, then let me bespeak your mercy for old age in Daunus, that's his dad, and return me or my body, stripped if you will, of my life to my own kin. You have defeated me. The Ausonians have seen me in defeat, spreading my hands. Lavinia is your bride, but go no further out of hatred. Now, I'm yours, he says. Kill me, but think as a father and give my body back. Now, Aeneas is only wounded Turnus. It's not fatal, but Turnus is asking for a sparing and reminds him of his father, very similar to what Hector pleads with Achilles at this one. You might recall that now that he has been conquered, that this has happened, the words of Anchises might come back to Aeneas, to battle down the proud and spare the conquered. These were the great lines that are spoken in Book 6 when he talks about Rome's future destiny. But Aeneas, even though Turnus is conquered here, does not just battle down the proud and spare the conquered. Fierce under arms, Aeneas is described. Aeneas looked to and fro and towered and stayed his hand upon the sword hilt. So it looks like he might end up granting mercy in this one. Moment by moment now, what Turnus said began to bring him round from indecision. So it looks at this point like he might spare Turnus, he might spare the conquered. Then to his glance appeared the accursed sword belt surmounting Turnus's shoulder, shining with its familiar studs, the strap young Pallas wore when Turnus wounded him and left him dead upon the field. So the belt that Pallas had, that when Turnus stripped it from Pallas's body, the poet ended up saying that you'll wish that you had left it there, that you'd not brought it around. So Aeneas is now being reminded of the death of Pallas, who is that young man that he was going to train and bring to battle and kind of raise. He's the stand-in for Ascanius, for Ascanius can't be in the battle and die, but if Pallas dies, you could have Aeneas get very angry about it. Now Turnus bore that enemy token on his shoulder, enemy still. For when the sight came home to him, Aeneas raged at the relic of his anguish worn by this man as trophy, and blazing up and terrible in his anger, he called out. So Turnus might be getting our sympathy, but Aeneas is now enraged here. You in your plunder, torn from one of mine, shall I be robbed of you? This wound will come from Pallas. Pallas makes this offering, and from your criminal blood exacts his due. Those are the last words spoken by Aeneas in the whole epic. And the last 4 lines here, lines 1295 down to the end, are the very last of the poem. He sank his blade in fury in Turnus's chest. Then all the body slackened in death's chill, and with a groan for that indignity his spirit fled into the gloom below. And so it ends on Turnus's death, and it ends with this anger, this wrath of Aeneas rising up and killing Turnus, who is here as a suppliant before him. It ends with him ignoring the words of his father to spare the conquered and to battle down the proud. And so many look at the end of Book 12 and wonder, was Virgil finished? Is this indeed where he intended to end the epic? Is this the end of the story? That there will be wrath and rage and that Aeneas will in the end destroy Turnus, and that our sympathies, like they were with Dido in Book 4, seem to be more with Turnus than with Aeneas here at the bitter end of the epic.